one of the ways that we have the opportunity to do evangelism is by really truly understanding our community. So just a couple of introductions. Most of you know who I am. I'm Sandy Coelho, and I serve all of you as the Leadership Development Director at the Baptist Convention of New England. And anytime you have a question or would like to get a hold of me, you'll see my email right there on the screen, and I'm happy to resource you in any way that I can. And tonight, I'm really excited about our special guest, who is Hal Haller, who is the Associate Director at the Baptist Convention of New England. Welcome, Hal.
Well, thank you, Sandy.
Yeah, so tell a little bit about yourself, and then when you're ready, you can jump in, and I'm going to disappear, and I'm going to run your slides, and if you need anything, I'll be listening, and I'll be taking care of everything in the background.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Sandy. Just a little bit about me. My background is in church planting, part of church planting for over 25 years, but also been involved in a lot of different aspects of ministry. And the training and teaching that you're going to get tonight really comes from those 25 years of experience. I do have the privilege of being able to lead our multiplication team. Sandy is one of the members of that multiplication team. We have Dr. Gary Moritz, who does revitalization. We have a partnership director and several other people in terms of our team of how we advance the gospel here in New England. I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to share some of these learnings from the past 25 years. But I also want to let you know that this training here that we're doing, typically, I would do in a 3-hour session. And we're not doing 3 hours. In fact, we're going to do this in 50 minutes, but I don't want to cheat you in any way. And I think we can do this effectively. But I will say that there is a part 2. And so I want you to make note of this, because the part 2 is the practical application of what we're talking about tonight. And when I say practical application, I'm not talking about you won't get any practical application tonight. I hope you will. The practical application will be you actually engaging in the community, discovering things for yourself. And then we do the part 2 will actually be a conversation and some stories of what you discovered in your community. I think this will not only be helpful for you, but it will also be helpful for the others of you that are participating tonight and what they're learning in their community and what you're learning where you're at. It will be a collaborative, hopefully enriching conversation as we do it together. So please make sure that you join that second part and make sure you do some of the assignments that are applicable to what we're going to be talking about tonight. This training I've done literally with hundreds of people. In fact, I've had the opportunity to see thousands of people trained in what I'm going to talk with you about tonight. This is principally centered. So this isn't about methods or programs or anything like that. This is about using biblical principle to be able to understand your specific community, the context in which God has placed you. And I think this is important because in New England, as you know, it's very town-centric. Every community is different. Yes, there are patterns of commonality within New England, but where you live is going to be different than perhaps another city, a rural city compared to Boston, or a rural city compared to Hartford, Connecticut. There are vast differences, not only in city size, but even the flavor of each state. So hopefully we can use these tools here that I'm going to talk about to help you gain a better understanding of your community. And if these tools work for you, you will be much more effective at reaching people, particularly who are far from God. And I'm going to use a base text that's found in Acts chapter 17. It is actually written in your outline, but you may want to look at it in your Bible or on your phone or whatever. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the macro, and then we're going to work from the 30,000 foot view, and we're going to get more and more specific as we go through the training. So big concept idea, then becoming more specific and practical about what you can do to understand your community. So go ahead and take a look here at the first page. Now, Jesus gives us an admonition. He says, to be in the world, but not of the world. So when Jesus is talking to us, he's saying that it's very important that we don't adopt worldly practices, that we are actually set apart from doing what's wrong and evil. We don't conform to the culture, but he says that we're to be in the world, meaning that we're not to isolate ourselves, but we should be engaging particularly with lost people that are in our cities, that are in our community. This is the mandate of Jesus, to be holy and set apart, and yet at the same time, making sure that we're rubbing shoulders with sinners, people who are far from God. It's God's heart and his desire for us to be salt and light in the world. That was his approach to culture. Now, what is our response to culture? What should we do? And so we're going to get a little more specific about this. The first thing that we do is anything that we recognize that's contrary to God's word or to a way of life that is different than what God has called us to, we absolutely have to reject. We reject evil in all of its forms, injustice, immorality, idolatry, because our lives are called to be holy and perfect and righteous. So when we see things in culture that are wrong, we don't adopt it, we reject it. But when we look at our culture and our context, there are some things that are actually good. I find that most Christians, what they like to do is they like to really just focus on all the things that are wrong in our culture, all the wrongs that are in a particular city or community. But there are some things that are actually good. And when we see something that is good, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, when we see something good, we can embrace it. And we can leverage that for the sake of the gospel. And then thirdly, we want to redeem what is broken and lost. Just this morning, I was talking with a mother whose son tried to commit suicide last night. And he's broken. He's been involved in all kinds of stuff that has led him down a pathway to self-destruction. And I could either condemn him or I can work towards redeeming him. I can encourage his mother to find ways to get back to living for Jesus Christ. Our goal is to always redeem what is broken. The lost can be found. Those who have strayed can be found once again. This is the heart of Christianity. So just as a quick review, we're going to reject what is evil. We're going to look at the culture. We're going to look at our community. And we're going to identify those things that are good, and we're going to receive it. And then anything that we see that sin has broken in the lives of people or in the community, our job is to actually redeem what we've seen is broken. All right, so let's go to the next page here, or the next topic. I have probably a different sheet than you do, but let's go to the next one in terms of this practical application. What are some of the things in the town and the city that you live in, your community? What do you see as being evil? What do you see in the culture that absolutely is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ? Now, as you're thinking about it, I want you to write as quickly as you can. I'm only going to give you about a minute. All right, so take 60 seconds and write down as quickly as you can. You see the blanks, there's 5 of them. Write down the things that you see that you know that you absolutely need to reject in your culture. Now, I lived in a community that I was trying to reach. And part of understanding was to understand what are the barriers, what are the things that are preventing people from coming to know Christ. And I lived in a highly immigrant town. It was very cosmopolitan. And most of the people who had moved into my city, they were pursuing the American dream, which was get a house, make money, and get on easy street. But I noticed something that was different between the typical American and the typical immigrant. The immigrant was going to put way more hours into it. They might work 16, 18, 20 hours. Their whole life and focus was on working, making money, and supposedly working towards a better life for their children. And so they were driven by materialism and greed. Do you see something like that maybe in your community? Do you see that as a potential barrier to people coming to Christ? Because they were so consumed by their busyness and their materialism, they didn't have time to really understand what was really important, to even pursue something that was spiritual or eternal. We might look at our community and we can see that there are so many different activities. There may be a lot of busyness that's going on, and they've lost sight of their priorities. Maybe in the particular city that you're in, you see people who have all kinds of addictions, and these addictions are getting in the way. You may live in a community that is highly irreligious. It may not just be irreligious in the sense that people don't go to church or don't know Christ. It may be irreligious in terms of being hostile to Christianity. You may be in a community where people's goal is to be successful, and there's a certain arrogance that comes along with that, and an inability for people to actually listen, or maybe perhaps selfishness. What is it that's in your community that just screams out to you as you've interacted where you live? What are those things that you know are wrong, or they're evil, and they might get in the way of someone coming to know Christ? So what are those potential pitfalls in my culture? So I just want you to identify one or two of them. This is not to be a comprehensive look, but this is to get the ball rolling for you to really take a look at your town or your city or your culture or your community and really identify some of the pitfalls that people fall into. Now, let's turn our attention to what might be the best in our culture. The best, what is actually good. So let me give you an example, and I'm going to give you, again, another 60 seconds or so to write down all the good things that you see in your culture. Typically, when I do this training, people typically get their first 5 when it comes to the wrong and evil in their community. They get it just like that. But then oftentimes it takes people some time to really think about, is there really something good in my culture? I remember when I first moved down to Miami, Florida, and part of my journey was actually starting a church in that community. I was not as well aware of the Hispanic community, but most of the church, or most of the people I was actually reaching my church, were from Hispanic background, particularly a Cuban background. And they just thought and acted completely different than I did. I didn't understand a lot of things that they did because that wasn't the culture that I was brought up in. But there was something that they did that so challenged me and so impressed me that I just took notice of it and said, I want to do what they do in my life. I love what they're exuding. So for instance, I remember growing up as a kid, typical Anglo family. And if we had a birthday party, I would have the opportunity to invite maybe 8 or 10 of my friends, and the party might be for 2 hours, go from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. And then after 3 p.m., the party is over and you clean up and you're done. Well, in typical Cuban family, it doesn't operate that way. In fact, I remember the first time I got invited to a party, and I showed up at 1 o'clock, just like they had told me to show up, and nobody was there. I was all by myself. I waited 2 hours before the first people arrived for the birthday party. And I'm sitting there going, what is the matter with these people? Like, they can't even show up on time. And the first people to show up, I mean, this party should be over by now. Why are they wasting my time? That's what I was thinking in my mind. But then another couple, and then another family, and then another family. And before I knew it, excuse me, nearly 100 people had showed up for a birthday party. And that birthday party didn't last for 2 or 3 hours. It went into the wee hours of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I realized that, like, my upbringing was focused on the Greek word, which we know as chronos, which is the exact time, 1 to 3. But the Hispanic community operated on a different Greek word, which is kairos. And kairos is, what is this time for? And the time was there to celebrate family, spend time together in an unrushed fashion so that you could deepen your relationships with one another. I never saw a more tighter, more loving, caring community than I saw in the Hispanic community, because they were committed to each other. And it really made me think about, wow, I like the way they operate. I'd like that kind of family value to be a part of my own family value. What are the things that you see in your community that impresses you, that you say, wow, this is good. This might even evidence a biblical value or principle. We can see not only family being a value, but you might see that people in your community are very charitable, or maybe they're very cause-oriented. And you can see how people like to just get involved in something that's worthwhile. And you can see that they're not stingy, they're charitable. That's something to celebrate. That's something that's the best in culture. That's something which we could say we could receive as something as good. Or maybe you're in a community and you see a very strong work ethic and you're impressed by that. Or maybe we're a community, anytime there's a tragedy, they always come together. There's a focus on one another. Or maybe a community that is committed to health or safety or the beauty of a community. What are the things that you see in your city, in your community, that you would say is good? Because let me say this, the gospel has something to say about that which is evil and that which is good. And both can be used to leverage the gospel effectively in a community. So what are the common cultural values that actually correspond to my faith? So what I want to do is I want to take these primary thoughts, these simple concepts that we just talked about, and talk about how the Apostle Paul leveraged these in the most incredible way. And we see this in Acts chapter 17. Now, let me just give you the setting in terms of what Paul has just entered into. He's entered into the city of Athens. And as far as we know, there's been absolutely zero gospel witness in this town. And when he walks in, it becomes very clear and apparent to him that idol worship is a high cultural value in Athens. And what we see in this story is that Paul leverages the religiosity of the culture in order to share the gospel. And the Apostle Paul points to something that the culture believes in, which is the unknown God, and he uses it as a platform to point them to the true God. So let me do this. Maybe you can just read along with me as I share this story. And as I read it, perhaps maybe it's better for you just to listen than to read along. Do whatever is best for you in terms of you engaging. And here it goes. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You're bringing some very strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting and he said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way that you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now, what you worship is something unknown I'm about to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by human hands. In fact, he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man, he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not very far from us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. And he has given proof to this to all men by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. And at that, Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. So let's take a look here at Acts 17, and let's break it down. Now, typically, I would give you some time to do the research and look at this, but I'm going to give you a little cheat sheet here tonight. It's not the full description, but it will get you started. And what I'm asking you to do is that you will go back to this sheet and you will take a deeper dive in answering some of these questions, because this chapter is so rich in helping us to not only understand and discern a community, but actually know how to talk to that community in a way in which the people can understand who Jesus is and what he has done for them. So let's just take a quick look here. What did Paul see as evil in Athens? Most of you know that right off the bat: idol worship. Now, let me tell you how profound it was in Athens. The city of Athens worshiped over 30,000 different gods. Now, I didn't say they had 30,000 idols in the town. They had over 30,000 gods that they actually worshiped. There were hundreds of thousands of idols that were in the city of Athens. One historian said that there were more idols in the city of Athens than there was in the entire Roman Empire. And when Paul sees the rampant idolatry, what do you think is going through his mind? Remember, Paul, trained as a rabbi, knowing the 10 commandments backwards and forwards. You will have no other God besides me. You shall not worship idols. He sees the rampant idolatry, and it says he becomes distressed. There is the ultimate anxiety and stress over what he's seeing. He has a deepened burden for the people because he sees the lostness in the community, and it cuts him to the core. I remember one time going to a community, and the first thing I determined to do is I would drive and just carefully observe the community and pray over every single house. I did this for several days. And one day as I was driving and praying over the houses, I just couldn't see anymore. And I had to pull over to the side of the road. I couldn't see because I was crying spontaneously over what I had seen. As I was praying, I was seeing the lostness in the community. I could sense and see what God was seeing in the community. And it was cutting me to the core. You won't effectively reach your community until God does something in you and cuts you to the core, and you can see how pervasive the lostness is in your community. And that's what Paul saw. But you know, he didn't just see the evil. He also saw something good in Athens. What did he see? Well, for starters, he saw that the people were actually very religious, that there was a spiritual openness that was present in this community. These weren't a bunch of atheists. These were actually a group of people who had some kind of spiritual desire. Granted, it was completely misplaced, but they had a spiritual openness, and he commends them on it. Now, where does Paul actually go to interact with his community? Look at that passage right there in the beginning again. It says he goes to the synagogue. That's where the God-fearing people are, Jews and God-fearing Greeks. But he also goes to the marketplace. Now, how often does the Apostle Paul do this? Every day. Every single day, he's interfacing with spiritually religious people, and he's also interacting with irreligious pagan people, people in the marketplace. And he does it every single day. I remember when I was working in a church, and I had been working there for several years, and one day it hit me. I was not spending the majority of my time with people who were far from God. Most of my time was with people who were in the church and other Christian friends I had. I had very few relationships with people who were far from God. I was not making the time to interact or to build relationships with them. But this is what the Apostle Paul does. And by the way, we see this later on in the chapter. How does he have such an amazing understanding of the people? How does he know what they believe and what they value? It's because he's been spending so much time with them. He knows exactly what makes them tick and what's important to them. Now look at the next question. It says, how do the Epicureans and Stoics respond to Paul? Well, there are three basic, and I don't have time to tease all this out, but three basic responses. One is they're confused by what he has to say. When he's sharing Jesus with them, it doesn't make sense to them. They hadn't heard this before. In fact, not only were they confused, they were skeptical about what he was actually saying. And thirdly, they actually were wondering if Paul was like a cult leader. So there's a question that uses, what is this babbler trying to say? When you take a little bit closer look at it, it's the idea of a bird who's building a nest and he's getting all kinds of stuff from different places. So what they're thinking is that Paul is perhaps making up a new religion on his own. They're confused, they're skeptical, and they're not quite sure where he's coming from or what his intentions might be. Now, where do the Athenians gather for spiritual discussions? Where's the place where they have that dialogue? Well, here in the story, it's the Areopagus. It was the place where people exchanged ideas and their thoughts and their religion and their views. It was the regular intersection point. How does Paul build a bridge to share the gospel to the Athenians? Well, what does Paul do? He takes their religiosity, right? Their belief in the unknown God. So this is the one God, right? Out of the 30,000 plus gods they worship, they're saying to themselves, maybe we didn't cover all of the gods. So there might be just one we don't know about. And Paul takes this belief that they have, and he uses creative license to point them to who the real true God is. And it's an amazing thing that he does to build that bridge to them. Now, what evidence does Paul give that he's very familiar with the cultural ideas, values, and beliefs of the people in Athens? Hopefully you're writing a few of these things down yourself. Maybe you got these ahead of me. But we can see he refers to the poetry. We know that the Apostle Paul probably didn't know anything about their poetry until he actually entered the city. But he also talks about their beliefs and what they think about who these gods are. Now, I want you to know they had some commonality in their thinking, and I don't have time to explain this, but I want you to know that when Paul gives this sermon to them, when he gives them this talk, he does not waste one word. Every single word he uses is on point. He is giving a perfect description of what they believe, and then he's countering what they believe with the truth of the gospel. The Apostle Paul very well knows what's important to them, their cultural understanding, their core beliefs, and their values. And how did he know it so well? Because he spent time with them daily. You can never replace regular, consistent time with people in the community who are far from God. You can do all the demographic studies you want, but if you want to reach the people in your town, in your community, if you want to understand them, then you have to spend time with them. And it's obvious by what he says that he knows them full well. Now, here's what's interesting. When Paul speaks to the Athenians, what is the overall tone of his message? Now, you would think that he would be condemning. It's just outright wrong, the idolatry that they were actually practicing. But interestingly enough, Paul can see through their sin, and he sees that these are a broken, lost people that must be redeemed and restored. They need the good news of the gospel. And so whatever hiccups he might have had that made him so distressed about seeing all the idolatry around him, he was actually able to see through that and see them for who they were, people who were valuable to God. He didn't fall to cynicism or condemnation or judgmentalism. He comes from an approach of love, and he finds a way to communicate with them in a way they will accept it and embrace it. So what is the spiritual receptivity level in Athens? I think, honestly, if you take a look at it, I would say it's fairly open, and it's very representative of many of the places that each of us are at, where God has placed us. And we can see that by the responses of the people after Paul has spoken. Now, when Paul finishes sharing about Jesus and his resurrection, notice the three responses that are given. Some sneered, all right? So they're like, take a hike, Paul, we're not buying any of this. It says, then some wanted more discussion. Okay, we're getting the idea of what you're talking about, but we need to talk more about it. I'm not quite sure I can get my hands or my head around this. And then it says, some actually believed. Now, let me ask you this question. Is that any different than what we experience today? I think it's very common, right? Some are just going to walk away. Some are going to need some time for you to walk with them and unpack what the good news is for them. And in sharing the gospel, some will immediately embrace it, just like the Apostle Paul. Now, I want you to take a look at these 5 practical questions for cultural engagement. Now, here's where I'm going to ask you to be dead level honest. I want you to be honest in answering these questions. Number one, where are the places I need to go to interact with my community? You see, Paul went to the places where people lived and worked and gathered. What does that look like for your community? Where do you need to go where you have the best possible opportunity to interact with people who need to know about Jesus? Write something down. Number two, how familiar am I with the ideas and the values and the beliefs of the people in my community? You know, I can honestly say that when I was on staff of a church, this was years ago, and we thought about trying to reach people, we never started with the people we were trying to reach, what was important to them and what they believed and what they valued. We would always just go right straight to an activity. Like, why don't we do like a vacation Bible school? Or why don't we do a carnival? Or why don't we do a barbecue and a picnic? And we would always come with events and activities without ever talking and understanding the people we were trying to reach. So I want you to be honest. Have you been spending the time with people on a regular, consistent basis who do not know Jesus? Do you know what they value? Do you know what they believe? Do you know what's important to them? I want you to try to write something down. If nothing comes to mind, that's fine. You're just being honest. Number three, what is the spiritual receptivity in your community? Do you live in a community that's just rocky soil? Is it hard? I mean, most of the people in your community, are they atheists or agnostics? Is it fertile ground? Do you even know how open people are to the gospel? Outside of a church context, what has your experience been? And with how many people have you had that experience with? Do you feel like you could adequately answer this question based on your interactions with people in the community? Is it hard? Is it easy? Number four, where are the places in my community where spiritual conversations and discussions are already taking place? Listen, these conversations are taking place in your community. Now, they could be in person, or they might even be online. But where are the conversations taking place in your community? If you don't know where they are, you need to find out. Because 2,000 years ago, there was a place with Paul in the Areopagus where conversations were taking place. And I can tell you today, nothing has changed. Those conversations are taking place. But do you know where they are? Where are those places? Perhaps you know. Write them down. If you don't know, you might even you could just sketch out a couple of answers and say, well, maybe it's at a coffee shop, or maybe it's at, this place, but you can at least take a stab at it and then see if you can verify if that's it. Number five, what are the creative ways I could share the gospel that take into the account the culture of my community? So if I were daily interacting with people and I understood like their ideas, their values, their beliefs, the things that were important to them, and I knew where they were coming, spiritually speaking, in terms of the receptivity, and I was already engaged and involved in the spiritual conversations taking my community, then what practical steps could you take to reach them where they are? Now, this is the essence of the Great Commission, right? That as you are going, right, we are to make disciples. Most of the time, our thinking is that the people in the community must come to us. But Jesus says, you must go to them. And in the essence of this teaching, this is what the Apostle Paul did. This is what Jesus did. And this is what he's asking us to do. What would you need to do to engage them in a meaningful way in which they will embrace Jesus? So you ask me, well, how do you do that? I'm so glad you asked, because I have some thoughts and ideas for you. So here we go. Look at the next point. Contextualization. You'll see a fancy definition that's put there. You can put that up, Sandy. But really, here's what it is. In terms of contextualization is, where is God at work in my community? And what is the best way I can deliver the gospel to people so it makes sense to them? That is taking the gospel and making it real to people. I'll share a little bit more about this idea in just a moment. But the first point is we have to start off with the fact that your job and my job is to be missionaries to our culture. You know, you might be a pastor, and that's great. You should pastor well, but you know what? You're a missionary. And pastoring is one of the things that you do. A missionary is one who goes to another group of people to deliver the gospel to them in a way that they are willing to embrace it, to understand it, and internalize it. You might be a plumber. You might be a businessman. You might be something, but your job ultimately is to be a missionary, to get the gospel into the hearts of people that you're trying to reach. And that's simply your goal as a missionary, getting the gospel into the hearts of the people I'm trying to reach. What this means is you're trying to find the platforms in people's lives to share the gospel. Now, let me explain and give you an example of how Jesus did this. So if you remember in John chapter 3, there's a guy named Nicodemus. And Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He is theologically educated. He is wealthy. He has status. He's a powerful man. And he comes in the darkness of night because he has a lot to lose if he's going to be seen with Jesus. And he asks Jesus a theological or philosophical question. And Jesus responds in same fashion, tells him that he has to be born again. And this catches the curiosity of who Nicodemus is. Then you look at John chapter 4, and you couldn't find a more different person. This is the Samaritan woman. She's not religious. She's actually irreligious. She's not a person of high standing. In fact, she's a woman of immorality. Nicodemus has a lot of money. The Samaritan woman, she's broke. At best, she's blue collar. If you do the differentiations between the two, they go on and on. Completely different person. And the way that Jesus speaks to her is completely different than the way he speaks to Nicodemus. He speaks to the Samaritan woman on a practical need or felt need that she has. She's tired of carrying those jars of water. And Jesus says, hey, I've got living water. Like I got something that's going to satisfy this practical everyday need that you have. And she says, I'm in. And if you look through the story of the Gospels, every single encounter Jesus has takes into account the person that he's speaking to, what they need and what they value. This must be our job. In order to reach the community, we must understand what they need and what they value. And if we're going to be effective, we need to do two things. Number one, we need to listen to God. God is doing something in the community. In fact, God is speaking, and he's speaking all the time. The question is are you listening? Like he cares more about the community that you live in than you do. And he's already at work. He's stirring things up. Your job is to listen to him and to ask him what you're supposed to do. And then secondly, you listen to him, and then you listen to the people in the community that you're trying to reach. This is what the Apostle Paul did. He spent every day listening, finding out what people valued, what they believed, and then he crafted a message specifically for them so they could embrace Jesus. Now, here's my strategy, is to take what I'm learning as I'm interacting with God, listening to him, right? And as I'm listening to other people and skillfully developing a plan to develop, right? Or to communicate the gospel to my community. So I'm developing a plan to do that based on what God's telling me and based on the things that I'm engaging with the people that I'm trying to reach. Now, how do you do that? Here we go. We're honing it down. Here are ways that you can listen to God and others in your community. Number one, my heart and my mind are clear and free for God to speak to me. No presuppositions, no assumptions, no paradigms. You're clearing the slate. In fact, they say that the longer that you live in a community, the less that you will see. In fact, there are a lot of things that we assume about a community that are not true. We just assume them. I have a friend, he has 2 computer screens that he works on. And I look at it and I don't know why he does that. Maybe you do that. It's not a dig towards you, but he works on both and he's moving stuff back and forth. This is what I would say to you. Everything that God's ever taught you, everything that you've learned about him and church and all that, take all that information and put it on one computer screen and leave the other one blank. And say, God, you've placed me here to reach the people in my community, in my workplace, in my neighborhood, or wherever it is. God, I'm clearing this slate so that you can say to me whatever you want to say. I don't want to assume anything. I don't want to go to my old defaults of how I've done things before. I need you to breathe something new in me. So I'm all ears to what you have to say to me. And your focus is on listening and talking to God. So it may involve praying, fasting over your community, times of silence or meditation, digging into scripture. And it's this pursuit of God. God, I know you know what the key is to the community. God, I know that you're already at work. God, you got to show me. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to come up with my own ideas and thoughts. I want these to come from you. So you start with God. Then I carefully observe those that I'm trying to reach, where they live and where they gather. And so I watch and I wait and I walk and I wonder what it all means. And I say, as I'm looking, God, help me to see what you see. You see, when Paul walked into the city of Athens, God opened his spiritual eyes and he became distressed. He saw the lostness in his community. But that requires you to carefully observe the people. I have lots of stories related to this, but I know our time is getting short. But you can tell a lot from your community just by simply watching. I took a guy one time to a neighborhood and I said, this is an area you want to reach for the gospel. He said, yes. All right, let's just sit here. And I asked him this question, what do you see? And he said, well, I see a street, I see some sidewalks, I see some older houses along the block. Yeah, that's what I see. I said, great. Now tell me, what do you see? Oh, well, I see front porches. Oh, it looks like there's some slides over in a couple of these backyards. I see some fences over here. Looks like there's some cars lined up on the street. Yeah, that's what I see. I'm like, okay, great. Let me ask you a question. What do you see? What do you mean, what do I see? I told you what I saw. No, what do you see? Well, I see a couple of moms. They're pushing strollers in the community. I go, I see that. I see some people who are sitting up on their front porches and they're talking. I go, yeah, I see that. I see some kids running up and down the street. I go, yeah, I see that. He goes, this looks like this is an open neighborhood where I could actually talk to the people who are here. I go, yeah, I see that too. See, the everyday common things we see, sometimes we ignore, but God wants to show us something more than what we've seen maybe 100 times. They say the average person will see between 3,000 to 5,000 advertisements a day. That's like signage on the roads and the internet and everything else, 3,000 to 5,000. I can't even remember one time I've seen 3,000 to 5,000 advertisements. You know why? Because I only zero in on what I think is important. In fact, scientists say that your brain has a patterning system. And once it's identified the things that are important, you screen everything else out. And the longer you live in a place, the more you will screen out, because you will only identify the things that are important to you. Like when I traveled to Maine the other day, and I probably passed 10,000 signs on my way to Maine. But you know what? The only signs I saw were the ones that were listed on my GPS, because I was only interested from getting from A to B. That's all I saw. That's why Jesus says, open your eyes, lift your eyes up so that you can see what I see. I want to challenge you, and this will be one of your exercises, to go into your community and look at it fresh. And for you to sit and say, God, what do I need to see? What do you see in this community? And then I ask questions that help me learn about those that I'm trying to reach. So I'm interacting like Paul did, and I'm trying to discover where they're coming from. And I have a real dialogue and conversation, and everything that they're saying to me, I'm trying to discern what's really important to them. And the whole time it's happening, I'm saying, God, help me to understand what's important to those that I'm trying to reach. One time I was with a lady and I asked her this question. I said, can you tell me what's important to you? She said, well, yeah, my family. And I asked her the question. I said, well, why is your family important to you? She said, 2 years ago, my brother died in a car accident. I used to take my family for granted. I don't take my family for granted anymore. In fact, I get together with my family every Friday night and we have a meal together. And I say, that's why family is important to you. We'll never understand what's important to people unless we ask and we listen. I have a friend who does corporate training across the US, and she told me this. She teaches corporate CEOs how to listen to his employees and vice versa, or he or she. And he said, or she said to me, within the first 10 minutes of a conversation you have with someone, they will reveal a deep need that they have. But she said, the problem is we're not listening. So when you go out into your community, I want you to listen to God. I want you to carefully observe the community that you live in. This is what the Apostle Paul did. In fact, it actually uses the word, he carefully observed. He took everything in. And then I want you to interact and listen to the people that you're trying to reach, not to convert them, but to listen to them. Find out where they're coming from so that you have an understanding of what's important to them. Now, I want you to take a look as we wrap this up here in just a couple of minutes of the exercises that I have here. Here's your homework. The first one, the exercise is, this is just to get yourself ready, prepared. So sometime here in the next week, I want you to spend time with God, pray, even look at your pace of life. Just slow down and be still. If there's anything that's between you and God, confess it and dwell on scripture and just tune in to him. The second exercise I want you to do is I want you to go in your community, anywhere where people live or gather, and I want you to answer this question. What do you see? All the clues that are important to you reaching that community, you can see with your eyes. You'll see what people value. You'll see what's important to them without saying a single word or asking a single question. I want you to spend at least a half an hour in one place, whether it's a park or a neighborhood or a grocery store parking lot. I want you to carefully observe. Then exercise number 3. I want you to talk to 10 people and ask them the one simple question that I mentioned earlier. What is important to you? In fact, if someone asks you, why are you asking me that question? You can just simply say, I have a homework assignment. I'm supposed to find out what's important to the people in my community. You're going to be shocked by how many people will open up and tell you what's important to you. And I guarantee you that there will be an application for the gospel to be shared based on that need or value. The Bible has something to say about it. But I'm not asking you to share the gospel. I'm not asking you to pray with them. What I'm asking you to do is to listen to what they have to say. Now, I want you to know that oftentimes when I tell people, I'm not asking you to pray or I'm not asking you to share the gospel, what happens is those situations naturally arise. If the Spirit is saying, pray for them, then pray for them. If the Spirit says, hey, listen, you need to share the gospel with them, share the gospel. I'm not asking you to do that. In fact, this is the no pressure kind of question. Tell me what's important to you. In fact, people will share with you because that's a way that you can love them and care for them. All right. And then exercise number 4, finally, is I want you to take everything that you've done as you've been interacting with God, the things you've been seeing in your community, the things that people have been revealing to you as you've been asking them simple question, what's important to you? By the way, most of those conversations are 3 minutes or less. Some may be longer, but you can do this pretty quickly. I want you to take what did you hear? And then I want you to answer the question, what can I do? All right. What did I see? Write it down. What's the main thing you saw? What did God reveal to you? Secondly, what did you hear from the people you spoke to? And while you were doing this, perhaps God was impressing something on you. And so you write that down. You know what? I really felt like God was saying this to me. And then if there was anything that you learned, a key thought that surprised you or affirmed what you were looking for, I want you to write that down. Then once you've written all these things down, I want you to answer this final question or statement. Based on what I saw, based on what I heard, if I were to put a plan together to reach the people in my community, I would do this. And you're starting with the people you're trying to reach. I hope this has been helpful to you. I'm sure some of you will have a lot of different questions, and I want you to, interact with me. I don't know, Sandy, if you have my email that you can put up, but you certainly can ask me questions along the way. The next time we get together is on May 19th. So that gives you about 2 or 3 weeks to work on these things. And if you do it, I promise you, God will do something amazing in your life, perhaps in the community you're trying to reach, or even in your church. And by the way, don't waste this opportunity to not take somebody else along with you. So if you can think of someone you could take with you to just ask these simple questions or to do the observation with you, definitely do it. It will be a very encouraging, enriching, and inspiring time. Okay, I think I've run out of time, right, Sandy?
Did well, Hal. You can now breathe a little bit here. You did well. You did well. Good content, really good content, and the great flow. And I think it was clear. So now the work is on the folks that are watching. And many of them are watching with members of their church. So this is going to be a really good exercise because now they have almost a month, to interact with their community, then maybe come back as a church. And when we get back on the 19th, prior to that, I'm going to send you just a couple of questions because Hal is actually going to open up the webinar so we can listen to what some of your testimonies will be. And so, so stay tuned. If there are people that you would have liked to have come to this webinar that couldn't, I'm going to make that available to you in the next day or so. So this webinar will be recorded. It's been recorded and it'll be edited, and we'll send that to you so you can do that. And then you'll also get a link so you could register for the May 19th one. And even if people didn't come to tonight, right, Hal, they can certainly jump in at the next one.
Yes, and let me just say one more thing, is if you, for instance, if you have a church and there's 10 of you and all of you do 10 conversation, that represents 100 people in your community. And you're going to find that there are patterns of things that people say are important to you, and it will inform you. And if you end up doing 100 or 200 or more conversations, and you would like for me to come to your church and help you build a strategic plan based on the engagements that you've had in your community, the things you've learned, I would be happy to do that with you.
Great, great. And I did put your email into the chat so that if they need clarification or want to contact you about doing something, with their church. But in the meantime, really work with those exercises and come back on the 19th for some more insight and hear some testimonies as well. And, get to that next level. This is a process, right?
That's right.
So we're not going to, we're not solving everything tonight. We're just laying the foundation for you. And then remember, we do have some more webinars. And if you go to bcne.net/evangelism, we have some more that are coming up. And we want you to be a part of that as well. And we're so glad that you could join us tonight. And remember that those of you that have had multiple people on, I'll be sending you an email follow-up that your church could be eligible for a $250 evangelism grant for you to use with some of the things that you've discovered about your community. So we really appreciate that you took your time tonight to join us. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Hal's going to be hanging around for a few minutes to look at those. And if there's anything else we can do to help you, that's what we're here for at the Baptist Convention of New England. So thanks for joining us tonight. You have a blessed night, and we look forward to seeing you on May 19th